So let's talk about terminology a little bit. So one thing I want to say about this is this terminology is always fraught. These are terms that maybe we can use in this space to just kind of know what we're talking about here. And the thing about terminology also is that it's okay to use a term. It's about the service that you're putting the term to, right? It's the intent that you're putting the term to. But terms can be fraught, and as long as we're interrogating how we're using terms, then we're okay. And so the reason I say that is because sometimes we're worried about labeling students, but sometimes if we are using a label in service of that student and we're being critical about that use always and taking feedback, then we're usually on pretty safe footing. So I'm going to use multilingual today to talk about students for whom English is one of their languages. They might be bilingual, but multilingual is maybe an umbrella term we can use because we don't actually know sometimes how many languages the students are bringing. So multilingual can help us catch those students. Sometimes we use native or first language, and the linguists in the room are like, yeah. But I want to pause on that for a moment because what we're talking about there is the difference between when you acquired a language versus when you had to learn it in school. So you know that by the time you get to school, you're already using language. And so that's usually the language that a linguist would point to and say, okay, this is your first language, or this is your native language. And then languages that you maybe had to learn in school, we would maybe call it a non-native or second language. And that's just to kind of make that distinction. And those of you who have had those experiences maybe can imagine what I mean there. I put those in quotation marks because, again, terminology is fraught, and there are scholars who really interrogate, are very critical of terms like native because there's a whole like ideology behind that. So I won't get into that today, but we could talk about it some other time if you'd like, or afterwards. Let's use code switching to talk about when we're moving between languages, and code meshing when we're bringing them together. So you were talking about Romanian English. That makes me think of how some linguists use the word code meshing. And style shifting to move between kind of styles of a language. So when we think about like teacher voice versus like I'm at the bank, calling the bank voice or something like that. And then there are also, I mean, there's so much we could say about this, but of course there's translanguaging, and there are some folks in the room and online who probably know what that is. I won't get into that today, but I will just preview that to say that that's a term that calls attention to the fact that boundaries between languages are actually kind of artificial. And also to not be critical of that also plays into certain language ideologies. So my point is terms can be a little tough, but maybe for today we can use these terms in this room. Does this sound good? Everyone is good with these? Okay, great. So the reason that the field has kind of moved to multilingual is because to talk about students using multiple languages is because it's accurate. We don't actually sometimes know how many languages they're bringing, but also this is asset discourse. This is how we can highlight the skills that students are bringing rather than highlighting something that they might be lacking, or even just that we perceive that they're lacking. For example, sometimes we think that we're hearing a non-native English, right? We think this accent is, in the ear, right? But sometimes what we're actually hearing is a different English. So it's the first language of the student, but it doesn't sound like your English, so it may seem like they're a non-native quote-unquote speaker. But if we want to kind of interrogate that. Terms that you may find do not fit your students are like English language learner. I think it's safe to assume that students who are in your classrooms, they know English. They're always learning and strengthening that, right? But they're not, I don't know that they're really defined by the fact that they're learning English. We're all learning English. I learn new words all the time, right? I learn new rhetorical strategies all the time, new words all the time. ESL student is also probably not always going to fit what you're talking about either, because sometimes, like I said, English is one of their native languages. It's not a second language. It's just that you're hearing something. It's a different English. So that's why we're using multilingual. And what I want to do now is sit with kind of the different types, if you will, of multilingual students. Now I'm walking around. What's she gonna do? Walking around. I want to just interrogate, or not interrogate, but expand maybe our view and idea of, or maybe even stereotype of who is a multilingual student. And so, sorry, Christina, I created work for you.
It's okay.
She's like, I'm used to this.
No,
Okay. So Your multilingual students could have all kinds of different backgrounds, and you can't assume one background for them. So I have a couple of examples. These are all based on students that I have had in the past, although this is not them and their names, but let's go. The first one is Yunfeng, is originally from China, studying in the US on a visa. Mandarin is her first language. She has been taking classes in English since she was 6. Derja is from Ethiopia. His family moved to the US when he was a teenager, and he first learned English as a third language in high school, also speaking Tigrinya and Amharic. Madison was born in the US and has been taking classes in English since kindergarten. She grew up speaking Arabic, Chaldean, and English. So you can see that there's all kinds of different backgrounds that your students can be bringing, and multilingual does not equal international in the sense of, the university uses the term international to mean studying on a visa, and then domestic is students, who are not studying on a visa. But they may have very international backgrounds. And so we want to think about that as kind of a Venn diagram of like who our students are. And sometimes you have students with very international backgrounds, but are maybe monolingual still, though, just English, depending on, their family situation. So just helping us kind of disrupt any easy definition or any easy simple idea of like who multilingual students are.